think interestingly, Anthony's business is backed by a huge amount of bank institutions, so I think everything they've been doing is based off what their owners are looking for. So we're a little bit more agnostic. We're open at the moment. Public blockchain, private blockchain. Some people are okay with some of the perceived issues with public blockchains, but certainly a massive world for that. So next, Jacqueline, but usually known as JK. Securitize, probably one of the leading token issuance platforms in the world. The founders of Securitize are also the founders of Spice Venture Capital. It was one of the first digitized venture capital funds. They're actually one of our investors in our company, so they tokenize the venture capital fund, give investors digital shares. What was the point of that? Typically, VC funds are 10, 12, 15 years long. If you had a digital share, you'd be able to potentially trade in and out of that a long time before the end of the fund. And the fund itself invests into blockchain and distributed ledger technology infrastructure platforms like ourselves. So anyway, I'm going to throw it over to JK. She can tell you all about what those guys are doing.
Thank you, Julian, and thank you, InvestaCrowd, for having me here today, and it's been a privilege. So before I go into the presentation itself, I want to talk a little bit about blockchain and what it is. Because a lot of people get confused. There's Bitcoin, there's Ethereum, there's all these things, but you don't really need to really know how it works. What you need to understand is what information and communication is to the internet, value is to the blockchain. The internet allows us to share value, to communicate, to share and communicate across borders, for the most part, unless you live in China. Just saying. However, with value, blockchain allows you to transfer value freely without borders. But value is not treated all equally. Some, for example, a graphic designer designed a piece of art, puts it on the blockchain, that can be transferred freely, which is not the same as equity or a REIT. So with that said, we think that in order for certain types of value to be transferred across the world, they need to abide by certain jurisdictional laws, namely securities laws. So with that said, I want to start with a quote from Robert Greenfield, former chairman and CEO of NASDAQ. He thinks that 100% of the stocks and bonds trading on Wall Street could be tokenized, and in 5 years, 100% of the stocks and bonds on Wall Street will be tokenized. So why is that? Because using the blockchain, you can record ownership through a cryptographically secure shared ledger, as explained by Anthony before. It can solve the multi-stakeholder collaboration problem without the need of a central entity. It can also create an instant settlement capabilities, including monetary interactions, free bank capital, and de-risking some of the settlement and clearing processes. So this is the meat of my presentation that I want to focus a little bit on. Anthony had a similar slide, but I mostly want to talk about the differences between public chains and permission chains, or private blockchains, and who uses what and why. So for public chains, we think that this is for early adopters. Public chains include Ethereum, Tezos, to name a few. It's more for currently operating companies, typically smaller SMEs, funds, private equity funds, VC funds, and real estate. Early adopters also include crypto investors, high net worth individuals, and family offices, which is different from the permission side of things. For the permission side, as Anthony had alluded to, there are usually for institutional investors. The financial products that are issued on permission chains are typically available only to institutions, such as commercial papers, corporate bonds, big loans, and for institutional investors in large banks. We get questions usually from banks saying, can you guarantee that there is not a node running in Iran for Ethereum? And the fact is you cannot. So for large banks with geopolitical exposure, those are concerns that they need to think about. So, however, on the other side, on the public side, what are some of the advantages? Why are people doing this in the first place? It's because it is cheaper. The network already exists. You don't have to build it yourself. With very nominal transactional fees, which is gas, as Anthony was mentioning. There's basically no maintenance because this is a distributed, decentralized network managed by the public nodes or whoever has the computers that are running the nodes. And higher degree of decentralization, but that is more of a philosophical debate. I won't go into it. And on the other side, advantages for the permission chains is that you have control over who the nodes are. You know exactly who's reading your information. You know exactly who's changing the information. You know exactly what the governance rules are. And per typical institutional investors and processes and banks, they have different levels of information access. And private chains allow you to do that. Information can be segregated over different participants because not everybody needs to know everything, and you can actually be able to achieve this using permission chains. Some of the disadvantages. I won't go into it. This is repeated information. There are performance issues with Ethereum, the most popular blockchain. There's no control over the governance. You have no control over who the nodes are, and it is only pseudo-anonymous, not entirely private. What this means is that even though the identity information is not stored on-chain, you still get to see what transactions has happened. And some institutions don't like that. And of course, there's the risk of forks or 51% attacks. On the permission side, it's not fully decentralized, won't go into that, but also, from the get-go, you have to have complex governance with different participants and design it and architect it early on, so that you don't have to go back and change it, because as we all know, changing IT systems can be complicated and not very cost efficient. And echoing that point, it is costly to run and operate and requires incentives, different incentives for participants, which need to be figured out in the early stages. With that said, the conversion between public chains and private chains, we see this as very analogous to public clouds and private clouds, to bore everyone with technology. Public clouds, mainly Amazon Web Services, AWS, it started with working with startups, lending out server or compute power or storage power to startups so that they can rent it instead of build IT systems themselves. That's how it started. Now, the CIA uses AWS. So we think that there would be a convergence across the board between public chains and private chains. Public chains started first, but then you're going to see a rapid adoption of permission-chained issuers that would ramp up very quickly, way faster than public blockchains. However, through the course of time, we think that more and more people would be comfortable with public chain infrastructure, and hopefully by then their performance would improve. The same way that AWS has improved and how AWS has had the buy-in from large institutions and governments. So a little bit about kind of echoing what everybody has been talking about so far. Digital securities is nothing but a derivative. As you can see, we like to kind of put Bitcoin in reference there. It is a mere dot next to 4 big blocks of what consists of capital markets. Anything can be tokenized from a security standpoint. It could be real estate, it could be debt, it could be derivatives, it could be equity. We need people to start thinking about how do we leverage this technology to unlock further value, because the token is just a token. It's what the token represents that is important. We need the smarter people in the room, financial engineers, to come up with interesting investment plans, come up with ways to unlock value and create alpha for the investor, leveraging this technology, which has all these promises of liquidity, better capital management, better liquidity management, in order to, make the world a better place, if you will. So, with that said, I want to talk a little bit about some of the cases that have been out and issued on public chains. So, a very famous case is this real estate deal, which is Aspen Digital. This is a single asset REIT that represents the property managed by St. Regis in Aspen, Colorado. That's that. I'm happy to kind of talk about it offline a little bit, if you will. And also, lots of funds, as mentioned, have been tokenized. Spice VC, which InvestaCrowd Julian talked about earlier, is the first fully tokenized fund, VC fund, in the fintech space. That is a Singapore entity, actually. The first ever tokenized fund is actually Blockchain Capital. They tokenized 10% of their third fund. 22X, Cityblock Capital, Science are all venture capital funds. They did this because they want to be able to push profits back to the investor, their LPs, sooner rather than later. Because in order to really have an LP exit, it's usually during the end of the fund life. However, with this technology, with avenues, which is like ICTX, there would be avenues for investors to get out sooner rather than later, and that is attractive to the investor. Protos is a cryptocurrency asset management platform which represents a basket of goods, basket of cryptocurrencies. On the right-hand side, we see different types of equity companies. This is plain and simple, it's private equity, which is represented with a token. And some of the other interesting parts are Lottery.com and Current. Lottery.com is actually a tokenized revenue share of a global charitable raffle with a very interesting vesting schedule and a daily cash distribution. These are the types of deals that are unique and only made available using this technology, because just think about the paperwork you need to conduct when doing a daily cash distribution. It's a nightmare. Current is a unique case because they actually did an ICO in the United States and then got dinged because per US SEC, in order for a token to be truly a utility token, it needs to function strictly as an airline points or credit card points. And Current is not. So they are a security token. And because of that, we need to enforce compliance around the trading of this token. And digital securities and security tokens is really nothing more than allowing a global offering to work in concert, ensuring that no investor is stepping across each other, ensuring that there are no red flags triggered across any jurisdiction for any investor ever throughout the life cycle of this industry, life cycle of this security. So, how am I doing on time? Oh, okay. Getting there, okay. So I will end it right there. This is my contact information, and I would like to share with you a quote from the co-founder of Securitize most recently. I didn't get to update the slides. But he said that tokenization of assets and transactions started in earnest in 2019. And eventually investors will realize that there are no technical reasons or barriers that prevent all securities from flowing the same way information does today. When this happens, liquidity and the next generation of modern finance will have begun. Thank you.